On the night of December 29, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 was preparing for a routine trip from New York to Miami. This wasn't just any plane. It was a brand new Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, a marvel of modern aviation. At the helm was Captain Bob Loft, a seasoned pilot with nearly 30,000 flight hours. With him were First Officer Bert Stockstill and Flight Engineer Don Repo. A total of 176 souls were on board, ready for a warm Florida holiday. At 9:20 p.m., the plane lifted off from JFK Airport, soaring into the night sky. The flight was perfectly normal, just another night in the life of an airline crew. But as they neared Miami, just before midnight, a tiny problem appeared, one that would lead to a catastrophe. At 11:32 p.m., as Captain Loft began the landing sequence, something went wrong. He lowered the landing gear, but the indicator light for the nose gear didn't turn green. Only 2 out of 3 lights were on. Now, this was a brand new plane. The crew was almost certain the gear was down, and it was just a faulty light bulb, a $2 part. But protocol is protocol. They couldn't just ignore it. To give themselves time to figure it out, Captain Loft radioed Miami Air Traffic Control and requested to enter a holding pattern. He engaged the autopilot, setting the plane to circle at a safe altitude of 2,000 feet over the vast, dark wilderness of the Florida Everglades. Down below, there was nothing but an inky black swamp. No lights, no light marks, a total void. Up in the cockpit, the crew became completely fixated on that one little light. They tapped it, they wiggled it. The captain sent the flight engineer, Don Repo, down into a small maintenance hatch below the cockpit, known as the hellhole, to try and physically see if the nose gear was down. As the captain turned to speak with Repo, it's believed he accidentally nudged the control yoke. This tiny unintentional movement was enough to disengage the autopilot's altitude hold. The plane was no longer holding at 2,000 feet. It had begun a slow, silent, and fatally gradual descent, but nobody noticed. The entire cockpit crew was distracted, all their attention focused on one single malfunctioning light bulb. Outside, the darkness of the Everglades offered no visual cues that they were losing altitude. The plane continued to fly perfectly, smoothly, just downwards. They didn't realize their fatal error until it was too late. The first sign of trouble was the first officer's last recorded words. "We still at 2,000 feet, right?" Followed seconds later by the chilling sound of the altitude alert. But there was no time to react. The plane slammed into the swampy ground at over 200 miles per hour, disintegrating on impact. The crash was first discovered by an airboat operator named Robert Marquis, who was out hunting for frogs in the darkness. He rushed to the scene, pulling survivors from the mud and jet fuel-soaked wreckage. Of the 176 people on board, 77 survived. Tragically, 99 people lost their lives, including Captain Loft, First Officer Stockstill, and Flight Engineer Don Repo. The official investigation determined the cause was pilot error. The crew's obsession with a faulty indicator light distracted them from flying the plane. The ultimate irony. The nose landing gear had been down and locked the entire time. The bulb was simply burned out. A $2 part had led to one of the deadliest crashes in American aviation history. But the story of Flight 401 doesn't end in the swampy darkness of the Everglades. In fact, for many, this is where it truly begins. After the investigation, Eastern Airlines did something that was standard practice at the time. They salvaged usable parts from the wreckage of Flight 401. Components from the galley, ovens, and other systems that were still in perfect condition were recovered, cleaned, and installed into other L-1011 planes in their fleet. It was a practical, cost-saving measure. But it soon became clear that something else might have been salvaged along with those parts. Something unseen. Within months, a wave of bizarre and inexplicable events began to sweep through the Eastern Airlines fleet, specifically on the planes that had received parts from the crashed jet. Flight crews, maintenance workers, and even passengers started reporting unsettling encounters. One of the most common places for these strange happenings was the galley, the plane's kitchen area. On one particular flight, a flight attendant went down to the lower deck galley to prepare drinks. The moment she entered, she felt an overwhelming sense of a cold, powerful presence. She was completely alone, but the feeling that someone was standing right next to her was so intense, she fled in terror. A few minutes later, another flight attendant went down to the same galley and experienced the exact same chilling sensation. Both women, who had never believed in ghosts, were left pale and shaken. But the sightings weren't just feelings, they were tangible. On another flight, a flight attendant noticed a man in an Eastern Airlines captain's uniform, sitting silently in a first-class seat. She tried to speak to him, but he just stared straight ahead, completely unresponsive. Thinking he might be ill, she got her own flight's captain. As the captain walked down the aisle and approached the man, his face went white. He stumbled back and gasped, "My God, it's Bob Loft." He recognized the dead captain of Flight 401. And in that instant, right before the eyes of the crew and several nearby passengers, the figure of Captain Loft simply vanished into thin air. The ghost of Flight Engineer Don Repo also made several appearances, often seeming to act as a guardian angel. A maintenance chief was doing a pre-flight check on an L-1011 when he saw the clear image of Don Repo standing in the cockpit, staring at him. He was so startled that he went to get two other colleagues. When they returned, the figure was gone, but all three men were convinced they had seen a ghost. Later, on that same plane, the flight engineer reported that Don Repo's ghost appeared before him and said, "You don't have to worry about the pre-flight. I've already done it." Another time, the pilot and first officer on a flight heard loud, frantic knocking coming from the hellhole beneath the cockpit, the very place Don Repo was in just before the crash. The pilot went to investigate but found nothing. As he was climbing back out, he looked up and saw Don Repo's face looking down at him from the cockpit, before fading away. It was as if Repo's spirit was trying to warn crews and prevent another disaster. These stories spread like wildfire among Eastern Airlines employees. Flight attendants refused to work on certain planes. Maintenance crews would report seeing faces in the ovens. They were cleaning parts salvaged from Flight 401. The airline's management was horrified, not by the ghosts, but by the publicity. They started a campaign to debunk the stories, threatening to fire anyone who spoke about them, and even sending some employees for psychiatric evaluations. Publicly, they denied everything. Privately, they were getting desperate. The hauntings continued for about 2 years, with hundreds of documented reports from credible witnesses, flight attendants, and ground crew. But then, in 1974, as suddenly as they began, they stopped. The ghosts of Flight 401 were gone. Why? Well, while Eastern Airlines officially denied the paranormal activity, their actions told a different story. It's reported that the airline quietly ordered the removal of every single salvaged part from Flight 401 that had been installed in their other L-1011 jets. Every piece, from the galley ovens to the smallest electronic components, was taken out and, according to some sources, either destroyed or sent back to the manufacturer. And once those haunted parts were removed, the sightings of Bob Loft and Don Repo ceased completely. The planes went back to being just planes, and the strange, chilling chapter in aviation history came to a close. Were the ghosts of the crew attached to the wreckage of their plane, trying to warn others and prevent another tragedy? Or was it all just a mass delusion, fueled by grief and trauma? We'll never know for sure, but for the hundreds of people who saw them, the ghosts of Flight 401 were very, very real. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more unexplained mysteries. See you next time.